right, my English teacher friends, Kristian Kuhn coming at you again, affectionately known as the Bob Ross at Composition. And up my sleeve, I got a good one. Microsynthesis. It's this brainchild that I have to make synthesis writing much more palatable and bite-sized for students. Because here's what I have discovered, and I think this will resonate with a lot of you. When I get to synthesis units, historically, I've hurled at my students, say like in my AP language class, the windmill prompt or the food truck prompt. And students struggle with that because here's the rationale. I'm asking them to do an end of course, cumulative assignment early in the academic year, and I haven't built towards that. And ultimately why they struggle is because the sources are too large for them to juggle and finagle in order to synthesize and incorporate into their analysis, into their argument. So this one's called Microsynthesis ViewMaster Edition. And what you'll see here is that it's a student-created assignment. My students made this assignment. They pretended to be the teacher, and all of the synthesis sources have to be on a ViewMaster slide. What does that mean? Sit in, strap up, and I'll show you in just a second, but they're going to be bite-sized parceled sources. And for this one, just to demonstrate how we did this, we're going to tackle the GOAT debate. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, a lot of the boys in my room in particular love to grapple and tussle with the following question. Who's the GOAT? The greatest of all time is what that acronym stands for in the National Basketball Association. So without further ado, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's called Kristian Kuhn, the Bob Ross at Composition. Sprinkle some love on that like button, leave some comments, and help me beat that pesky algorithm so that I can reach a lot of teachers and students. As far as slides and material go, down below in the video's description, you will find a Google slide for every screen that you see in this presentation. So all my models, all my exemplars are down below, free for the taking. All right, other things. Let's talk about this here. It's a student-generated prompt. And what I had my students do was follow the pattern of former exams. So let's say that I'm teaching AP language or I'm teaching 10th grade honors. I'm in New York State, so I have 11th grade region students. And on our state exam, we also have a synthesis paper. So what I had them do was study the prompts because there's patterns indigenous to those particular prompts. And then what I have them do is use the language of the prompt to create their prompt. And together with about 6 or 7 boys, we made this prompt together for the GOAT debate. And here it is. In recent years, NBA fans have made the GOAT debate a sport in and of itself, grappling with quantitative and qualitative data, both subjective and objective in nature. No one has of yet been able to definitively peg down a single candidate to unanimously crown, right? So you give the context of the argument there. And then the rest of this is stolen from the College Board from FRQ1. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on whom you deem to be the greatest of all time. And I could have used the New York State prompt if I wanted to. In my district, we have required course assessments. So with my 10th graders, we could have used any of those stems to hammer out the prompt. So that is it in a nutshell. In terms of guidelines for creating the source creations, here's what we have. We use Canva, and all of the information per source needs to be contained on one Canva slide, right? Just like a ViewMaster, all right? Small snippets, bite-sized information. So I capped it at 100 words. All right, they can use graphs, charts, graphics, video clips, especially for this particular assignment, the GOAT debate, works really well. But then I requested that the videos be less than 60 seconds. And then the key thing is I need to have multiple perspectives in here so that I can teach my kids how to do the concessions, the rebuttals, and all of that stuff in there. So obviously, you got to Bob Ross your instruction for this one. And what I mean is that you have to get to the proverbial canvas and easel and paint, and I air quote that, paint with and for your students. So I made this with my students, with the boys, because this particular demographic, they struggle the most in my class. So we built this together while the rest of the class kind of looked over our shoulders, and then they built their own and did a wide array of topics, things from predictive programming like The Simpsons, TikTok, banning TikTok. Basically, I had a couple of groups talk about why is it in Europe that certain foods are banned, yet in America they're widely accessible, like red dye, the Gatorades and the Red Bulls and all that stuff. So any topics of their choosing, and I'll make videos for those other ones down the road. So just sit tight for that. So let me show you the source material real quick. So in the GOAT debate, it ultimately comes down to two people, Michael Jordan and LeBron James. But other pundits will throw in the likes of a Kobe Bryant, a Wilt Chamberlain, a Jerry West, an Isaiah Thomas, and Allen Iverson. So what we did was this. We got the viewpoints of some of the other contenders. And in source one here, we have a snippet from Allen Iverson in which he explains why Michael Jordan is the GOAT. All right, so you can see there it's very small, but there's enough there for them to quote in, to take a quote or a paraphrase and infuse it into the paper. Source two is another contender, Isaiah Thomas from Detroit Pistons fame. And in this one, he espouses his belief that LeBron James is the GOAT. In source three, we have a statistical breakdown of LeBron and Michael Jordan. And you can see there that there's a great deal of parity between the two. And what I taught my students was silence. There's a pregnant silence in these statistics that really favors one over the other. And we'll get to that when we look at our writing samples. Source 4 is a YouTube video called I Might Have Cracked the NBA GOAT Debate. And that was less than 60 seconds, and it has some fascinating insights on the debate. Source 5 is one of the leading contenders. So folks that, grapple and tussle with this debate tend to go old school the older they are. And a lot of folks contend that Jerry West should have a voice in this. And Jerry West in this interview was asked, who would he put in his top 5 starting lineup of all time? So he can only choose 5 players, all position players. And it's a little soundbite of his top 5, which again is pretty fascinating to lend some insight and a spotlight on the debate. And source 6 is the statistical leaders for all facets of the game. Everything from turnovers, blocks, three-point field goals, free throws, steals, assists, rebounds, and points. And you can see there that really you only got a couple of players there that are in contention within this conversation, the likes of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, and LeBron James. The others typically don't enter that conversation, yet they, by numbers, are the leaders. Therefore, the best. Therefore, the GOAT. So that throws a little bit of shade on some of these kids as far as their thesis goes. So the question becomes, so how do I write the introductory paragraph? And for those of you that are familiar with my work, these next slides are going to look mighty familiar, and you might scratch your chin and say, Kristian is true. He stays static to his heuristics. Yup, we can use the declarative thesis heuristic and the inverted thesis heuristic. Let me break down what the declarative looks like. You begin with the thesis. And for my struggling emerging students, this works best because in the first sentence, they just enunciate and declare who is the GOAT. So they could say something like, hands down, unequivocally, Michael Jordan is the GOAT. And that's it. That's all they have to say. It's as simple as that. From there, you got to sprinkle in a little bit of context and background. Here's what I mean by that. This is going to be a 4-paragraph essay, intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. And by context and background, you more or less set the GPS for the paper, the GPS for the line of reasoning. So it's like a compass or a roadmap. I call it the seeds of the line of reasoning. And you hint to your reader where you're going in your body paragraph. So what are you going to look at? What's the criteria in which you're going to unpack and defend your thesis? It is an academic paper, so I do want to see a fair amount of tier 2 level vocabulary. And what I mean by that simply is your average run-of-the-mill SAT level caliber words, sentence constructs. I have a mantra in my class. Repetition is the bane of the writer's existence. And oftentimes students get repetitive at sentence level. They overuse short, simple declarative sentences, independent clauses that yield that type voice rhythm flow. So I explicitly teach the 12 sentence types, which can be found in Strunk & White's Write It Right, and then the 20 sentence patterns. So in the hopes of achieving better voice rhythm and flow, I want my students to, wield different types and different constructs. And then the introduction is going to be exactly 4 sentences. So it's simple math. 4 paragraphs for the essay, 4 sentences for the introduction. We can flip that declarative and call it inverted. And all we do in that case is we start with the GPS, the compass, the roadmap, the context, the background, the seeds of the line of reasoning, and we end with the thesis. So the 4th sentence is going to announce who the GOAT is. The rest of it stays static. You still got to have some tier 2 in there. You got to cook the sentence constructs. That might be a little nebulous, a little pie in the sky. So let's unpack it. So one little piece of advice that I give my students before they write is this. You have to know your direction. You have to know what your GPS is going to be set to. So you have to know the criteria by which you are claiming somebody to be the GOAT, right? And you're going to drop those 2 seeds for the line of reasoning in your introductory paragraph. So here's the first example. I'll read it, and then we'll unpack it together. Not only is the commentary of most sports pundits outlandish, but it is categorically incorrect. The fact of the matter is this. Jordan doesn't even qualify to be considered into the top 5 best players of all time. But like with anything, statistics and data samplings can be misconstrued to contort the truth of the matter to bend the argument in one direction. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, Wilt Chamberlain is hands down the official GOAT of the NBA. So when I'm grading papers, I do this. I spy with my little eye the thesis, and I tear this apart, and I'm like, thesis, where's the thesis? And clearly in this one, the GOAT is announced in the last sentence, so it's an inverted thesis. So they're going with Wilt Chamberlain. Well, what's the GPS set for? One paragraph is going to discuss and deconstruct why Jordan is not. And then the second, and possibly even the first, is going to look at how statistically those numbers lie, that they build a false argument. And ultimately, we have to hammer home the fact that Wilt Chamberlain, Wilt the Still, is the GOAT of the NBA. All right, might be a little confusing, but let's paint another one. Just like sample number 1, the student needs to know their direction, right? They need to know exactly what they're going to write before they write. Otherwise, they're going to get wayward and kind of discursive, and things get quite haphazard when we write that way. So number 2 says this: whether one wants to admit it or not, there are countless moot points within the scope of this debate. Not only does one single player far outperform all of his comparable peers, but one player statistically far outshines all other NBA contenders, past and present. In spite of acknowledging that Michael Jordan does not take home the prize in every quantifiable category, he nonetheless is a once-in-a-lifetime athlete who's the poster child of the league. Riding the coattails as such pundits and leading contenders in the debate like Jerry West, Kobe Bryant, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, this topic is a closed discussion. All right, so the thesis is clear. We are announcing Michael Jordan as the GOAT. This is why I like this paper. It's very easy. All you have to do in order to get a thesis is announce who are you crowning the GOAT. One body paragraph is going to take a look at some of the leading contenders like Jerry West, Kobe Bryant, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who all uniformly stated that Jordan is the GOAT. And then the others, we're just going to take a look at Jordan's statistics over the course of his career and crown him champ. One thing we didn't talk about in sample 1 is the tier 2 level vocabulary. So let's talk about it in this one. The vocab in this is very nice. You have words like mute, you have words like outshines, you have words like pundits, coattails, quantifiable. You don't want to overdo it and be a complete dweeb and a geek, because the idea is not this. The more $1 million words that I use, the better my writing. You want to disabuse students of that. They have to stay in their wheelhouse and sound natural, but they want to sound as if they're their academic best. For my boys in particular, I said, talk like Stephen A. Smith or Walt Clyde Frazier. He's the commentator for the New York Knicks. I'm in New York, so most of my boys are familiar with them. Those two have some pretty vast vocabs. I think Skip Bayless is another commentator that wields some nice language. In terms of sentence constructs, in sample number 1 and sample number 2, I advise my students to do this. Drop sentence 1, look at it. Sentence number 2, write a sentence that is different than number 1. Sentence number 3, write a sentence that's different than number 2. Sentence number 4, write a sentence that's different than number 3. That usually gets kids to break that independent clause, stacking of the same sentence construct. Yes, you can do this, students. Yes, teachers, your students can do this. Let's see it one more time. It's good writing, and it takes practice, and you got to Bob Ross it in order for your kids to be able to do this. So don't be afraid, teachers, to write with and for your students. I know that that's a nightmarish prospect for some teachers, but it's really a best practice. While prominent mouthpieces in the debate have been known to make some rather moronic assertions in the past, the bright ones out there have been right on the money in stating that Michael Jordan is the GOAT. So this one's declarative, right? We crown Jordan the GOAT in the first sentence. So it doesn't matter, first or fourth sentence. Now let's set that GPS. All one really needs to do is study the statistical bylines and data samples that fueled the debate. So we're going to get into numbers, paragraph 1, paragraph 2. We're just looking at numbers in this paper. Unfortunately, those who champion the cause for players other than MJ, so we're going to take a look at other players as well, conveniently overlook these numbers. No matter how one slices the issue, Jordan is the clear and only front runner. And that's that. Sentence constructs are varied. Vocab is up. GPS is set. We got ourselves a thesis. Easy peasy. So at this stage of the game, teachers, I tell students, give it a whirl. Hit the pause button right here and write your intro. Share it with a buddy. Make sure you have some eyes on your writing and get some feedback. One thing I do like to do as a teacher is take a look at student samples and exemplars after they go through this initial phase. And again, what I like to do is have the student present their sample, and I like to have them explain how they know their direction before they begin writing. How are they going to establish the line of reasoning? Students articulating this for students, I think, really demystifies the process for a lot of kids, because unfortunately, even though I say this ad nauseum, some students attempt to write without knowing their direction. So it's really, really crucial. So just to shore this up, just to really hammer it home, let's take a look at a student sample. So this is one of my boys that wrote this. Typically, sports pundits and fervent fans overlook the hard science in this debate. But on rare occasion, these talking heads land upon the essential determining factor, winning championship rings. While there are certainly other variables to consider, what ultimately tilts the scale within this debate is the difference between the winners and the losers. Most couch potatoes unfortunately have it all wrong. The real GOAT is Jerry West. So real quickly here, it's inverted. And one of the main contending factors we're going to take a look at is championship rings among the contender. Who has the most? Because it's a game of basketball. You play to win, right? So the one who has the most rings should be crowned the GOAT. That's this kid's argument. So that is, in a nutshell, how to do the introductions. As I stated before, it's a 4-paragraph essay, so we still got a lot of white space to go. Question becomes, so how do I write the body paragraphs? Ta-da! Heuristics are staying the same. Friends, colleagues, we're going to use the syllogistic method. For those that are new to me, let me give a quick overview of this. If you want to do a deep dive, just plug away in my YouTube channel. I got a lot of videos on this heuristic. So the syllogistic method comes from Aristotle. It's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. When he ran his school at the Lyceum, he taught his students how to debate, how to orate, how to wrangle their words in terms of substantiating arguments. And he noted that the kids who really were stellar with their arguments used a heuristic known as the syllogistic method. And guess what? Aristotle was principally concerned with something that we are concerned with, that pesky line of reasoning. So he created this quasi-mathematical formula in which to house logic, because writing is this. Good writing is good thinking. Good thinking translates into good writing. So he called it premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. Let me give you an example. If I come out and say arsenic is deadly, you're all going to nod your head and say, yep, Kristian, you are correct. But if I give you some textual support, if I use some source material and say, well, this morning I went out into the kitchen to make a cup of coffee, and I noticed that my dog Snickers was beneath the sink, and when he pulled his head out, there was white stuff all over his muzzle and grizzle. And I said, oh no, I put some arsenic beneath the kitchen sink because we have a rat infestation problem. I'm naturally going to conclude, uh-oh, my dog is going to die. Morbid example, I know, but it resonates with kids. So how do we morph that into a heuristic for the purposes of writing synthesis? Here it is. First premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. So up top in the introductory paragraph, we just announced who the GOAT is, and we don't get into the why reason specifically. So the specific why is going to be housed in the first premise. There's some math to this. The first premise is going to be 3 sentences long. There are some rules for those 3 sentences. No quotes, no paraphrases. Here's the reason why. So on the Regents exam in New York State, just like the FRQ1 on AP Lang, and I know other state exams borrow the same language, you'll hear something exactly like this or closely akin to this. Your argument must be central. To keep the centrality of the argument, the kid must make their argument, and it has to be originally their own. So if they're borrowing source material, it ceases to be their argument, and in effect, what they're doing is writing plot summary and not argument. So we want to make sure that the argument stays central. So beginning in the 4th sentence is where the student will bring in the textual support. So you saw our 6 sources. So any of those 6 sources, those ViewMaster slides will go in there, and the students can either quote it or they can paraphrase it. To keep math simple, all right, because I have some struggling emerging writers, I'm asking my guys this: 3 sentences for the first premise, and then I want a combination of 3 quotes and or paraphrases. So you can have 3 quotes or 2 quotes, 1 paraphrase, just a total of 3 source citations in there. And then we have to remember that paragraphs need to be concluded as well. Oftentimes kids will finish on a quote and then they run like hell and get out of there. And we as teachers are like, no, get back here, finish the thought. So everything needs to go full circle, back to the prompt, back to the thesis, echo the promise of the first premise. So we might be asking ourselves, so how do I write this first premise? I have a couple of stems that I allow my struggling and emerging students to use. If they use these, they will automatically articulate a why reason. So you can say there is a clear reason as to why, and simply by saying reason why, by default, you're going to articulate the reason why. Or if they have a couple of reasons, they can say there are a couple of reasons why. Here's one in totality, the full 3 sentences. And again, no quotes, no paraphrases, no mention of those sources at all from the ViewMaster. There are several reasons why most experts' claims are untrue and off the mark. First, in several of the most important statistical categories, Jordan is not even in the upper echelon of players. Second, the era in which this alleged GOAT played saw some of the worst gameplay in the history of the league. So the first premise is a promise. And when I'm working with students and doing workshop, I'll have them pause here and we'll sit next to each other and I'll say, psst, what's the promise of your first premise? And in this example, we did something called the enumerated process. You see how we say first and we say second? That little device right there is another way to keep kids organized. So in the first, we're saying that Jordan is not even a top contender statistically in a lot of the prominent important categories. And then second, that during his era, the epoch in which he played, that historically in the NBA was some of the weakest play. I disagree with that notion, but that's where this kid is going in there. So all the quotes and paraphrases need to be germane to the first and to the second. You really can't talk about anything else, otherwise you break your line of reasoning. And if you don't have substantial support and analysis for first and for second, then you're going to have a break in the line of reasoning. So just to recap that, first premise, 3 sentences, argue the reason why. All right, I'm going to show you another one here. Remember, what's the promise of the first premise, right? You have to articulate a promise in there and a why reason, and this will dictate the quotes and the paraphrases that the student chooses. So let's see it again. Let's take a look at another first premise. 3 sentences, no quotes, no paraphrases in there. Articulate a promise. The argument boils down to one simple fact. The true GOAT achieved unprecedented results without a single supporting cast member. So that's a promise right there. We have to look at now the sources in which the GOAT didn't have any support. Right? He did it mano a mano, one man doing all the work. Unlike all other contenders in the ongoing debate, Wilt Chamberlain neither played with fellow Hall of Famers nor anyone who ever made an all-star squad, right? So now we're going to have to take a look at who did these other players, who did Jordan play with, who did LeBron play with, right? Who did Isaiah Thomas play with, who did, whomever, Patrick Ewing, who did he play with? Quite literally, every other player in contention of the honor of being branded the best of all time had a star-studded cast of players to make their accomplishments mute in comparison to the one and only greatest of all time. So that's a clearly phrased, promised first premise. Now you just got to go get all the quotes and paraphrases to keep that aligned, and we set the math for that. We're looking for 3. All right. First premises are tricky, so I think I usually model it 3 times for students, all right, when I'm Bob Rossing. So here's one last one just to really unpack it. The raw truth of pure mathematics should be the only determining factor in this debate. So we're going to take a look at numbers in this, all right, across the statistical categories. If one is not discussing the sheer volume of championships won, buckets scored, MVPs earned. So those are the statistics, the 3 specific statistics that we're going to look at. then they are just a mere talking head uttering hollow words. From purely a point of statistics and overall numbers, Kobe Bryant is the clear front runner in the GOAT debate. From here, what do? This kid now needs to go quote hunting, right? Go quote and paraphrase hunting. Those 3 statistical bylines, you need quotes and paraphrases for, and that will keep the promise of the second premise. That becomes the support and analysis of the second premise. So let's talk about that second premise. It begins in the 4th sentence. Here is how I transition. So as we know, the second premise begins in the 4th sentence. And I tell my students, especially the ones that struggle a tad bit, I always tell them, get quoting in the 4th sentence. Like immediately get into your sources so that you're not prattling on and on and on and on with the first premise. So sometimes students will belabor that a little bit too long. So 4th sentence, we're going to start quoting. And in this transition, I'm going to use that Jerry West source, which was source 5. So here it is. In a recent interview with Jerry West, he was asked who he would include in his all-time starting 5 lineup, and he noted that the likes of LeBron James and any other honorable mention in the soft era only win a prize for being the king of flopping, source 5. Now, one thing that I do, I know there's a lot of math to my heuristics, so I often have charts that I make for students just to kind of keep everything aligned. I call it the 5-word rule. If a student places a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote and keeps the quote relatively small, it should sound conversational. And I'm showing my kids, because this is microsynthesis, I want to show them tricks. So you can see that I added that parentheses in there, right? Just to add a little paraphrase within the quote. And then he said flopped, and I have to make it conversational. So I bracketed that and said flopping. So teaching kids how to do parentheticals within a quote, teaching them how to bracket within a quote is all good instruction. But here's the kicker. We just quoted. Oftentimes kids run like heck. They just drop that quote and then boof, they're off into some other direction. And I say, no, get back here. You got to analyze that. So look at what happens next. Unquestionably, the physical nature of gameplay has dwindled over the last 2 decades, so much so that the path to a bucket is like throwing a stone into a vast, wide ocean. That's also from source 5, said by Jerry West. Right, so we got 1 layer or 2 layers of textual support in here. We use source 5 twice. I usually tell my kids, don't use anything more than twice in a given syllogism. So source 5 is now off limits. And it is true. Scoring in this era is far easier than it was in the time period of the Michael Jordans of the debate. Just from a point of physicality, the average size of centers has changed considerably over the last few decades, right? So we're going to continue on to the next slide here. So we're pivoting into another subject matter here. The size of the centers is something that often gets overlooked in this debate. And it's true, the physical frame, the physical stature of centers has changed decade to decade in the NBA. So let's see how we can incorporate the other sources to do this, because we want to do at least 3 sources in here. Even the likes of Allen Iverson are smart enough to note that centers in the league like Alonzo Mourning, Dikembe Mutombo, Charles Oakley, Patrick Ewing, possess frames and bodies that do not even come close to the puny pencil stick dorks of the LeBron era, source 1. So you remember that source 1 was Allen Iverson, right? So that comes from that source. And I used the 5-word rule and dropped it in there, and it sounds conversational, but I'm still showing my kids those tricks, the parentheticals and the brackets, because when the sources are really small, students are going to need to add some of their own verbiage to it in order to flesh it out. So I'm kind of overdoing it here, but I'm just teaching, right? Just Bob Rossing how to do things. So we quoted, we got to analyze it. This says a lot. And I asked my kids, what's this? everything that was just spoken in the quote. So I teach kids how to transition out of quotes with things like this or it. Simple words like that keep them anchored in the analysis. So this says a lot and adds a great deal of credence to the overall dispute. In breaking down the chart in source 3, one must note that while the numbers look almost identical, they are skewed for one main reason: access to the lane. The era of the dominant center entered when Jordan crossed the finish line of his career. As such, LeBron has had unfettered access to the hoop for easy layups and uncontested dunks. Source 4. So you can see here, typically in a synthesis body paragraph, I like my students to quote and or paraphrase 3 times at minimum, because synthesis, by virtue of its definition, implies multiplicity. So if they're only using one source, that's not synthesis. You got to go more than an uno, right? And 2 is bare minimum expectation. So 3 holds them a little bit more accountable, and if they want to do more than that, then great. So we got to slap a conclusion on this too, right? And we're still working in the same body paragraph, but we need to conclude the thought because we don't end paragraphs with quotations. So the next slide does that. And conclusions, I typically can do them in 1, 2, or 3 sentences. Clearly, in absence of discussing the singular variable, the conversation is really going nowhere. The bottom line is this: Jordan played against better athletes. In an era where defense is non-existent, one cannot consider the likes of a LeBron James or any other player from the current generation in this debate. And some of you might be saying, geez, Kristian, that's kind of a long paragraph. Yes, indeed. One last bit of math. A syllogistic body paragraph is 10 to 12 sentences. So those little itty bitty 4 or 5 sentence baggers that kids often write, there ain't even a chance in heck for them to have enough support or analysis in there to fully flesh out an argument. So they need more space. And I think that 10 to 12 sentence gives them ample opportunity to do that, but also it prevents them from bloviating on and on and on and on and on. Because what you're going to see here with hot topic debates like this, kids love this stuff. My boys are eating this up, and they can go on and on and on and on and on. And it's like, nope, 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 nope. Stay focused. Our primary concern here is the line of reasoning. So intro's done. First body paragraph's done. What do I do next? The answer is simple. You bust out another syllogism. The essay is 4 paragraphs long. And usually in the second body paragraph, that's the space that I reserve for concessions and rebuttals and things of that nature. So I'll show you a first premise that sets kids up for that. And here's the thing. If you're in a classroom where your kids are struggling, right? They're really a little bit behind the 8 ball on this. Here's what I would advise them to do. And I did this for a couple of my students. I gave them this first premise and I said, finish the syllogism. And I helped them get their quotes and their paraphrases, but had them finish this. And that seemed to work. That got them unstuck. So again, a first premise is 3 sentences long. And I'm going to change my focus here. But there's also a differing perspective on the issue that must be acknowledged and addressed. And a simple transition into the second body paragraph is the word but. Oftentimes my students will transition with the word but. One can easily concede to the fact that there is at present a tendency to call endless nitpicky fouls. One must not forget, especially during the Kobe Bryant era, about the phenomenon known as hack-a-shack and the Jordan rules. So then they go and tussle with that for a little bit. So what do you do from here? Same old thing. Follow the pattern. Keep the promise of the first premise. Go align all your support, so your quotes and your paraphrases, with the promise of that first premise, right? And you're shooting for 10 to 12 sentences. You're going to use the 5-word rule for your quotes. And then you got yourself a syllogistic body paragraph, and that's it. But we still got to wrap the essay up. Let's talk about the conclusion paragraph. I like using stems early in the year, and sometimes my students will use these all year long. I equate the conclusion paragraph to the grand finale of a fireworks display. It's the all-encompassing, all-encapsulating, exigence at the end. You're screaming again, the end, your big exigence. So I like encapsulating statements like simply said, evidentially, in no other words, when it's all said and done at the end of the day. As always, I got a model for you, and it looks like this. In no other words, comparing players from the soft era, 2010, to the present from previous epochs is like the difference between oranges and apples. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, LeBron James would be a bench scrub had he played among the physical centers of the league like Kobe and MJ did. The game has changed so much in recent decades, so much so that today's grades are rendered worthless by yesterday's standards. And again, a conclusion paragraph is like 3 or 4 sentences. You don't want to go on and on and on because it gets repetitive, redundant, and a tad bit reiterative. So happy teaching, happy writing, my friends. I hope you enjoyed that. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to drop me an email at teachingwritingcoach@gmail.com. I actually love it when teachers and students reach out to me. It's a lot of fun. I like that sense of collaboration. So got like this worldwide web at our fingertips. Why not use it and help each other become better teachers? Also note that I offer a lot of PD sessions throughout the calendar year, and I've been calling them Teach It Right PD sessions. So I can come to your district and work with your department or individuals within the department, and we can get all the alignment, pegged down in your particular department, or I can train individual teachers. Oftentimes, teachers like working with me one-on-one or in small groups. I can do that. I have a self-paced course that you can access at www.teachinghowtowrite.com. And there's a few other PD options available there. Just go to my website and take a look. I love working with teachers. So I'm a lead teacher for the National Writing Project and have done some work with applied practice and perfection learning as well. So I'm very, very familiar with working with teachers. So that's it for now. And I'm going to record some of my student work for their hot topic debates and share those out because I really think that microsynthesis is something we may want to consider down the road as we tackle synthesis writing. Take care, and I hope you enjoyed that one.